Let's talk about the Roman Republic, which you can see lasts from about 500 to 27 BC, before the Common Era. You notice we're getting close to CE, the Common Era, or as it's been known, particularly because of Christians, AD, the time period after the birth of Jesus. So anyway, and we're getting to that time period because he's born during this Roman age. So let's look at this. You can see right here, we're looking at the Roman Republic, and I'm making a distinction here. We're going to talk about the Roman Republic and then the Roman Empire, which is going to survive much longer. It survives in the West until 476, and then in the East until 1453, centered around Constantinople, which is right there. So we're looking at the Roman Empire. We're not looking at the Italian Empire. We're looking at the Roman Empire. We're looking at, the Roman Republic, I should say, and the Roman civilization. That is a civilization that is based on the civilization that emerges from the city of Rome. It is a city that starts out very, very simply. It's a farming community, a city. It's a farming community, a collection of little villages that suddenly grows and grows and grows in might and strength and dominates the Mediterranean world, establishes the cultural basis for Western Europe. I just mentioned Christianity. Roman Catholicism is going to be the dominant religion in Western Europe. And notice, it's not just Catholicism, it is Roman Catholicism. That city matters. It means something. So let's look at this. Early Roman history. The Romans settled along the Tiber River, in among some small mountains there, hills along the Tiber River, which gives them access to the sea, by the way. And we don't know a whole lot about early Roman history. Perhaps they were dominated by the Etruscans for some time. At least Roman mythology, Roman historical mythology suggests that. We do know that there are two different groups of people in Italy at that time, that region we call Italy today. The Etruscans in the north and central part of Italy, and the Greeks in the southern part of Italy. Remember when the Greeks had population pressures and they established colonies around the Mediterranean? A number of those colonies were established in southern Italy. So you have Greek-speaking city-states and Greeks in southern Italy. In central and northern Italy, where Rome is, you have the Etruscans. The region called Tuscany today is named for the Etruscans. We don't know a whole lot about the Etruscans. We think they organized Rome into a city. The Etruscans themselves, their language is written using the Greek alphabet. So the Greeks and the Etruscans have important influences on the development of the Romans. We think the Etruscans used the togas. They like togas. Gladiatorial contests were probably around by the time of the Etruscans, so they enjoyed that. So those things we associate with being Roman may have a couple of things we associate with being Roman, may have Etruscan roots or roots in Etruscan civilization. The Greeks, you remember, the Romans adopt the Greek alphabet. Later on, they're going to adopt the Greek religion or Greek mythology with their gods and goddesses, except they change the names of these, like Zeus becomes Jupiter, for instance. So these Greeks and Etruscans have an important influence on the development of early Rome. Now, we don't know exactly when, maybe 509, 507, sometimes around that time. The Romans overthrow Etruscan rule, and there's some interesting stories about that. The rape of Lucretia, which tries to present a sort of heroic and wholesome view of the founding of the Roman Republic around 500, and all kinds of stories about the founding of Rome itself. Remember Romulus and Remus, those figures, and the she-wolf. There are all these wonderful stories, which we're not sure, we don't believe it's true, about the founding of Rome. But we think the Republic is founded around 500 BCE, and it is a republican form of government. It's not an empire. Empires are led by emperors. This is a republican form of government, much like the United States is a republic. Now, this one's different, but notice in the United States we have something called the Senate. So did ancient Rome. The Roman Republic had a Senate. That was a sort of body of elders, a body of patricians, a body of nobles that advised the consuls. The consuls, that's not a council. It's not like a city council. These are two individuals. Romans in particular did not want a king. Instead, they create these two officials who are elected called consuls. And they manage Rome's affairs and also the military leaders as well early on. They're sort of the executive, royal, or conservative element within Rome. And so what you see is an early republic dominated politically by by the consuls and the Senate. But there are also a number of different assemblies that emerge, different legislative bodies, organizations, different assemblies. We won't get into too many of those, just talk about a couple of them. The Senate, by the way, was one of the assemblies. But there's another assembly that's going to emerge, and it's a plebeian assembly. And I have these two terms right here, patrician and plebeian. That's basically how early Roman society is divided between patricians, who are the aristocrats, they are the consuls, they dominate the Senate, and plebeians, who are other free Romans, ordinary Romans. Some of them poor, some of them may be wealthy businessmen. Later on, different groups come along, but we'll stick with patrician and plebeian. And those are the Romans early on, divided into those two social groups. And if you notice the title of this slide, I have something, it's called The Conquest of Italy. What's interesting is that Rome becomes a republic, and then the Romans themselves go on and conquer Italy during this time period. You can see it's a long process, nearly 2.5 centuries of conquest that occurs. And there are all these wonderful stories that happen about great Roman leaders, like an individual called Cincinnatus. We have the city Cincinnati. Cincinnatus, one of these early Roman leaders. When you read the myth of Cincinnatus, and it's a historian by the name of Livy who tells us this, it's almost as though Rome is threatened with being conquered by one of its enemies. And Cincinnatus, a small farmer, essentially drops his plow and runs off and reorganizes the Roman military and leads them to victory. And then he returns back to his simple life on a small farm. The idea is that this is what a Roman is supposed to do: serve Rome, do his duty, sacrifices himself, but not look for any sort of material rewards or benefits. Just go back to your simple, small life on the farm, instead of looking to become some sort of great Roman who's rich and powerful and all that. So there are all these stories like that. And that's the cultural attitudes that the Romans want instilled. And we do see particularly high death rates for patricians in Roman military battles, where the patricians fought in the Roman military. But the backbone of the military are plebeians. These are the ordinary Roman soldiers. They tend to have a little bit of land. You had to have land to serve in the Roman army, or as we call them, as they develop, Roman legions, a method of fighting that they get from the Greeks, by the way. And these are the ones who fight to protect Rome and to expand the boundaries of Rome as Rome conquers Italy and then later conquers the Mediterranean world. And what you see simultaneously with the conquest of Italy is something known as the struggle of the orders. The conquest of Italy means actually conquering other territories, conquering other groups of people who are Italians and the Greeks in southern Italy, ultimately conquering the remnants of whatever Etruscans were around, those sorts of things, and uniting them in this Roman Republic. The Romans extend something called the Latin Rite to a number of Italians, and that gives them citizenship, Roman citizenship, sometimes full citizenship, sometimes partial citizenship. But the idea is that you give some of these conquered people a stake in society, they're more likely to be loyal to you. And the Romans don't always actually go to war against some of their sort of Italian neighbors or neighbors in Italy. They often just work diplomatically to incorporate them into the Roman Republic. Now, domestically, there is something going on called the struggle of the orders, as plebeians and patricians sort of battle it out for power and the extensions of rights. Basically, it's plebeians who are beginning to demand more and more rights within Roman society, economic rights, but also political rights. And that's called the struggle of the order. It's a social struggle as plebeians attempt to gain more sort of rights of citizenship. And things that come out of this will be a plebeian assembly. The plebeians get their own assembly to pass laws that primarily affect plebeians. Plebeians get their own elected officials, just like the Senate had consuls. Plebeians get their officials. They're called tribunes. And one of the things the tribunes do is they bring plebeian complaints before the Senate. So that's a big innovation that happens. Another thing that happens is Roman law gets written down. Only the patricians really understood Roman law. And so you could accuse plebeians of anything, and they would have a hard time defending themselves. So plebeians at least get the right to read what Roman law is. Marriage between plebeians and patricians is going to be allowed. Ultimately, one of the consuls is going to have to be a plebeian. So that's more shared power for plebeians. And finally, there are a number of other things. But one of the other great things that happens for plebeians is laws passed by the plebeian assembly become binding for all Romans, patricians, and plebeians. So it's another legislative body that helps govern Rome. Now, traditionally, what would happen is that the plebeian assembly would take the law before the Senate and make sure the Senate already approves of it. But it doesn't always work that way. What's interesting when we look at Rome, early Roman society, we talked about those divisions between plebeians and patricians and the conquest of Rome, is that no sooner does Rome conquer Italy and unite Italy and extend citizenship rights and extend political power to plebeians, then they go to war again. The Romans are fundamentally fighters. Their culture is very simple. It's the cultural traditions that the conquered lands have that the Romans are going to grab and spread around Rome, not their own culture, but the culture of the Greeks and other conquered subjects. Now, shortly after conquering Italy, Rome is going to go to war against a mighty, mighty empire in North Africa, and an empire that spreads into Spain. That empire is known as Carthage, the Carthaginian Empire, an empire founded by the Phoenicians. The Roman word for Phoenician is Punic, so that's why we call it the Punic Wars. The first war, as you can see, lasts longer than 20 years. I won't get into it that much. Hamilcar Barca is the Carthaginian general. It is fought over Sicily as Rome tries to intervene and take over Sicily. It's during this war, the First Punic War, that Rome develops a navy. They become a naval power, which is essential, of course, for taking over the Mediterranean world. And they ultimately win. They get control of Sicily, and it works out. The second Punic War is the big battle. It's the one that involves Hannibal. You may have heard of Hannibal, the great Carthaginian general, and his elephants who he's got about 36 elephants that he invades or plans to invade Italy with from Spain, where he is based in Spain. Obviously, it's a challenge. Just the territory he has to cross. He has to cross rivers, and then he has to cross the Pyrenees to get into France, and then the Alps to get into Italy. And as you can imagine, elephants do not make dynamite mountain climbers. So only one, I think, makes it into Italy. But anyway, Hannibal, nevertheless, without those elephants, in battle after battle, he defeats the Romans. He lays waste to parts of northern Italy and central Italy. So he's an incredibly successful general. What he can't do is conquer the city of Rome. The Romans actually sort of used delaying tactics to hold off and restrict his advance. And so what you basically have is Hannibal occupying Italy for years and the Romans trying to prevent him from capturing the city of Rome. One of the things that Hannibal hoped to do was to get a lot of Italian allies when he invaded Italy. But because the Romans extended citizenship, they didn't lose too many of their allies, their fellow Italians. That extension of citizenship made people loyal. And what the Romans decide to do, if they can't beat Hannibal in Italy, and one of the big battles they lose is the Battle of Cannae, if they can't defeat Hannibal in Italy, let's take the war elsewhere. And that's what a general does. Scipio Africanus, the Romans move into Spain to fight the Carthaginians in Spain, and then they move to North Africa. They invade North Africa. And that makes Hannibal go home to defend the city of Carthage, and he loses at the Battle of Zama. Scipio Africanus, he gets the name Africanus as the conqueror of Africa after winning this battle. It's a major battle. And what this battle does is it gives Rome control over the Western Mediterranean world. So this is the big battle. This is the big war, the Second Punic War, that allows Romans to gain control of the Western Mediterranean war. There is a Third Punic War that's just a war of vengeance and destruction, where Carthage itself is basically annihilated. There was a Roman senator by the name of Cato, who every time he gave a speech, he ended with the phrase, "Carthage must be destroyed." It didn't matter what the speech was. It could have been a speech on the price of olives or something, and then he would end, "Carthage must be destroyed." And ultimately, they go to war, 149, and Carthage is destroyed. The city is laid waste and just leveled. And this is a time period when more and more of Romans' conquered subjects are becoming slaves, and he turned those Carthaginians into slaves. So as you can see, the Second Punic War over here. Here's the First Punic War, Sicily over here, Spain over here, and North Africa, Carthage right there, which is going to be conquered and destroyed. Another thing that happened, I want to say, in the Punic Wars is that when you look at this Second Punic War, Greece, parts of Greece and Macedonia allied with Hannibal in the Second Punic War. And what this does is, after they defeat the Carthaginians, is make Romans move over here to Macedonia, move into Greece to go take on those allies of the Carthaginians. And they ultimately defeat them and incorporate those territories into Rome. So the Romans are moving, after they take over the Western Mediterranean, into the Eastern world. This is a more sophisticated world. This is the Hellenistic world with the philosophy and the culture and the mystery religions and all that stuff. Plus, there's a lot of Greek culture that's going to filter into Rome. In fact, the Greeks are going to be used as sort of tutors and teachers for Roman children. Many of the Greeks become slaves. And a big result of these wars is that Rome becomes a slave-based society. It puts a lot of pressure on small farmers because big, rich Romans have huge farms and they employ slaves. So independent farmers find themselves not being able to compete with slave labor. You know, slave labor is free, and Rome has just an untold number of slaves. And the slaves, by the way, they don't just do farming, they do anything. They'll deliver the mails. Slaves do all kinds of work. The result of this, Rome becomes a slave-based society, and you see masses and masses of homeless people. You also see cultural changes going on. The culture of the Hellenistic age moves in and changes Rome itself. Romans begin to like certain aspects of the Hellenistic age culture. They start talking and embracing some of these new philosophies. They embrace some of these mystery religions that pop out of there. Mystery religion of Dionysus, which is kind of vulgar according to the traditionalists. The Romans suddenly take to bathing. Bathing was a Greek thing. Bathing is a public act. The Romans would build these baths, which are huge facilities, kind of like a big giant rec center with restaurants and places to swim and bathe and just hang out and see and be seen. And what you would see is women and young women and men mingling, and you can imagine what some of them do after they get some wine in their bellies and all that stuff. And so what you see is this cultural class, traditionalists, who look at this Hellenistic culture, this new culture that Romans are taking to, bathing, going to amphitheaters to see plays, holding dinner parties that last hours. You know, there's a vomitorium attached to some of these houses where you eat until you vomit. You know, that if that's not gluttony, I don't know what is. And so you see the traditionalists who say, you know, this is very different. This culture is immoral. Men and women shouldn't be seen in public together, for instance, those sorts of things. And so there's this clash between new Romans who say, no, we like this culture. This is good, fun stuff. You even see that today with conservatives and traditionalists attacking some of the new cultural patterns in America. Something similar happened in Rome. The new Romans, those who embrace the cultural changes, they went out. Traditionalists have a hard time surviving, right? We know that today. It's also a time period when Romans really take to sporting events, gladiatorial contests. By the way, we tend to think gladiatorial contests were the most popular sport. It was actually chariot racing. Chariot racing was the most popular sport at that time for Romans and for centuries thereafter. But they still liked the gladiatorial contests. And not all gladiatorial contests were led to the death of gladiators. They weren't always fights to the death, by the way, but they involved often a number of people. They would take thousands and thousands of animals out of Africa were captured to use in gladiatorial contests. It's just an amazing amount of bloodshed that occurred there. And crowds sort of relish the bloodshed as well. There's a violent nature. It's the ancient world. It is a violent and brutal time, unlike today, or at least we don't want it to be like that today. There's also the growth of Roman government and Roman bureaucracy at that time, because there's so many homeless and you have to deal with them. Rome itself is flooded. The city of Rome itself is flooded with homelessness. You see an increasing effort to take care of the poor and the homeless by just giving them some things, giving them food, and free entertainment. The bread would be the variety of different types of food, mainly bread though, to feed people. And the circuses would be the sort of free entertainment like chariot racing and gladiatorial contests. There you can see a part of Bath, which is in Bath, England, because the Romans conquered England. It's one of the public baths. Here you can see a public bath. Look how big that facility is with a variety of different types of room. You know, and the behavior of men and women scandalize those traditionalists. And what's going on? How does Rome become an empire? Well, beginning around 133, and it's an assassination in 133, we see the decline of the Roman Republic in its And ultimately, the end of the Roman Republic, it takes a while. And it's going to be replaced by the Roman Empire, where an emperor takes over. It's a slow decline. It lasts for about a century. But if you look at that 133 to about 27, you see an age of anarchy. Civil wars happen, a couple of different civil wars, an age of assassinations of consuls, generals, tribunes, senators. So you see a lot of political violence occurring as the Roman Republic is going to come to an end. That is, the political system that manages Rome. It just doesn't work anymore, and they replace it with an empire. It sort of begins in 133 with the two brothers, Gaius and Tiberius is the first one, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus. These are tribunes, and they look at the problem of unemployment, landless people, masses of poor people. They see it as a threat to Rome because you have to have land to serve in the military. So they want to undertake some land reform, take some land that a number of wealthy people have gobbled up and distributed to the poor, give citizenship to all Italians. Gaius Gracchus promotes cheap grain for the poor. Later on, it becomes free bread, free grain for the poor. So they promote these changes, but each one of them get assassinated. These are tribunes who get assassinated. Ushers in this age of violence, where you see men, military leaders, by the guys like Gaius Marius, who seize power in Rome. Why? He's popular. He's a military leader. And what does he do? He asks anybody to serve in his legion. And if you serve, he will give you property. So he himself abolishes the property qualification required to serve in his legion. You can understand, if your commander has given you things, they're going to be loyal to you. So you see a long period, decades of civil war, generals fight each other. You could read about Sulla and some of the others until about 59 BCE, when a group of three people get along, three powerful men get together and form something known as the First Triumvirate. Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Probably heard of Caesar, maybe heard of Pompey. Crassus kind of goes away. He dies in battle. But Caesar and Pompey are the two biggies there. And for a while, this rule of the three works. But these are powerful figures. They don't particularly get along. There's a lot of scheming behind the scenes. And then they turn on each other. Caesar is making his name in Gaul, which is modern day France, fighting the barbarian Gauls there. They may not like to be called barbarians. And Pompey and the Senate are going to declare war on Caesar. Caesar marches his legion into Rome. Pompey flees. He chases Pompey all the way to Egypt, where Pompey is actually going to be captured and killed by some brigands in Egypt. He meets Cleopatra in Egypt. They have a kid, which he doesn't recognize, by the way. He actually left her pregnant. She's going to come to Rome later, trying to say these are his kids. But he's triumphant now, and he returns to Rome after this, and he rules from 49 to about 44 as the sort of sole ruler of the Roman Republic. He expands the Senate and puts a bunch of loyal people in there. He creates new territories in the Roman world and gives land to soldiers. He's a very popular figure, but he's sort of acting like a dictator. And there is a conspiracy to get rid of him and to restore the power of the Senate. And it's going to lead to these conspirators rising up and killing Caesar and some of his men, but they don't get their hands on Mark Antony, his most loyal lieutenant. And so what you begin to see is a second triumvirate forming with Caesar's most loyal, most famous military commander, Mark Antony, Caesar's adopted son, a guy by the name of Octavian, and another commander by the name of Lepidus. The two key figures here are Antony and Octavian, and they round up the conspirators and defeat them in battle and kill some of the conspirators, and they rule. They sort of divide up the Roman world. Antony gets Egypt, and he and Cleopatra have an incredible love affair as well. But as you can imagine, it's Rome. Those two figures have a falling out. Antony and Octavian don't see eye to eye. Antony is a military leader. Octavian is kind of an intellectual. He didn't fight in any wars or anything. And so they have a falling out. Octavian accuses Antony of becoming un-Roman, of worshiping strange gods, that is cats and dogs, that is accusing him of becoming Egyptian and losing his Roman identity. And then they're going to have a falling out, and they have a big battle. There's a naval battle. The Battle of Actium, which is off the coast of Greece, where the navy of Antony and Cleopatra is defeated. And Octavian is going to move into Egypt. Antony is going to commit suicide or And then Cleopatra, who has some influence on men, apparently tried to put some moves on Octavian, but he had none of it. And she's going to end up killing herself with a snake bite as well. And we're going to look at this Octavian guy and what happens to him when he returns to Rome.